Hello and welcome to a new Analytica HP discussion. In this new format, instead of having a head-on debate, two of our members will discuss a subject to do with current affairs or history. Today, Luke and Archie will be discussing the future of the Republican Party of America. If you're interested in this sort of thing, please check out our website. So, Archie and Luke, what do you two think will happen to the Republican Party after the election in 2020? How do you think the election in 2020 will affect the Republican Party in the elections to come?
May I go first?
Yes, feel free.
Well, so I think the election of 2020 was a very important election for the Republican Party and a very negative election for the Republican Party, because for the past for the past 40 years, the Republican Party has been moving ever more rightwards. Long gone are the days of Dwight D. Eisenhower, when the Republican Party was the main centrist party in the U.S. and there was a very bipartisan atmosphere in Congress and in all the state legislatures, because actually the Republican Party was oftentimes more socially liberal than the Democrats, especially the Southern Democrats before the Civil Rights Act, when they were defending Jim Crow and such. But long gone are those days. I mean, the Republican Party, after Nixon's Southern strategy, because famously Lyndon B. Johnson, after signing the Civil Rights Act, said, "We've lost the South for a generation." The Democrats had lost the South for a generation, which was true. Then Nixon's Southern strategy was basically to appeal to the racism of the South in some way, shape, or form, as well as the richer, more patrician Northeasterners of the Rockefeller wing of the Republican Party. And that way, the Republican Party maintained relevance. And that sort of went on until Ronald Reagan. When Ronald Reagan energized the Republican Party, a Hollywood star, he more radically libertarian than any other Republican Party. I mean, you forget Nixon founded the Environmental Protection Agency, so the Republican Party wasn't that libertarian before Reagan. So Reagan, as a very neoliberal president from an economic point of view, energized the Republican Party in a sense, inspired its base. And from then on, the Republican Party has really been moving rightwards ever since. There was a short stint of George H.W. Bush after Ronald Reagan, and he was a patrician Northeastern moderate of the kind that was relevant in the old Republican Party, but he was duly voted out after he couldn't keep his promise of no new taxes. So any sense of bipartisanship since then. When Newt Gingrich became the Speaker of the House, he sort of took up a scorched earth policy of just do not cooperate with the Democrats, or we will crucify you in the sense of the Republican Party. And so you had the Bill Clinton impeachment, and I mean that was where we'd got to in 2016. The Republicans, apart from a handful of bipartisan ones who were holdovers from the last generation, like Susan Collins or John McCain, generally, apart from a few like those two, the Republican parties, under the cracking whip of Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, and I would also add to that the Republican Party's ideas of minimal government and sort of increasing freedom stuff, especially after 9/11 happened, when everyone was happier to accept more limitations to their freedoms, and basically that movement sort of died over time during the George W. Bush presidency, and then that was part of the reason I think that President Obama was able to win the 2008 election, and so it was during that time, essentially, that they lost their continuous ideas that they'd had for a very long time before that. And yeah, also the Iraq War as well. Their ideas of a lot of things, basically, like the Iraq War, happened to them that made their policies unpopular. And so they were at a sort of no-go zone, if you like. During the 2008 election, which is why Obama won, especially when the financial crisis happened under a Republican president's watch, which again is a mark against extra freedoms for banks and things like that. So essentially, they lost a lot of their momentum that they'd had previously. So they really needed a change, and that's really what they were doing during Obama's presidency. They didn't have a lot of ideas other than just making Obama a one-term president, which Mitch McConnell at the time said was his one biggest priority. You know, it didn't matter what the thing was that was being brought before Congress. It didn't matter what the issue was. The Republican Party opposed it if Obama backed it. And then, so essentially you come along in 2016 and they've decided that they're going to go with Donald Trump and his populist ideas. And, you know, no one thought that was going to happen. You know, people were laughing at people who ever even said there was a chance of Donald Trump becoming the president. And then he did. And so they went with that sort of populist, divisive, quite awful politics, really, which obviously then now has come back around to haunt them, because he handled the COVID crisis terribly. He made loads of big mistakes. You know, and then the Capitol insurrection, and basically, and a variety of different things that happened under his watch and that were arguably provoked by him, which means that there's going to be, which means that we're going to be looking at a change in the Republican base again, aren't we? Because you know, people turned against Donald Trump. Joe Biden got the most votes of any presidential candidate in history. Many of them were Republicans, and some of them lifelong Republicans. But
I would also add to that, though. Sorry to interrupt, but I think that you underestimate how powerful Donald Trump was to the Republican base. Donald Trump was no Reagan from his actual political actions, but from the way he energized the base. Donald Trump brought out new voters who he never thought he could, like Ronald Reagan did, because Donald Trump, to many people, was quote unquote like them. Like, forget the fact that he was a billionaire. He spoke like them. He acted like them. And to a lot of these rural towns in the Midwest, especially the blue wall, so that Hillary Clinton sort of took for granted, a lot of these folks voted for Trump because he promised to bring back the American industrial landscape, right? Bringing back coal. We're gonna have so much winning. You'll be tired of winning. All that sort of rhetoric deeply, deeply resonated with them. And although the traditional Republican Party had really, since 2008, just devoted themselves to stopping anything Obama did because they couldn't do anything, they'd sort of, after that, they'd realized that they couldn't really win elections based on that. And at their current policy level, they couldn't really appeal to Democratic voters. So they couldn't make themselves competitive in states like and say like California or New York or any like they couldn't make themselves competitive in states which have seen a huge demographic shift with more Latinos and more ethnic minorities, which obviously overwhelmingly tend to vote Democrat. And so after that, the Republicans realized they couldn't make themselves competitive there. So instead, they just need to drive up the amount of rural people voting and make themselves competitive in the suburbs. And the Republicans saw Donald Trump as all too easy to do that. They're like, even though they're like, he's sort of ridiculous, he is the only guy who can drive up the vote in these rural suburbs. And that's the only place we can really be competitive anymore. We're not going to be competitive in the cities, and we're not going to be competitive in states which have seen a large demographic shift. So so these people just saw Donald Trump as a way to drive up the rural vote. And they're like, what's the harm? But in the end, during those 4 years, the Republicans had to walk a tightrope. They couldn't openly like criticize Trump, right? Because that would mean that the huge rural base would duly either primary them or vote them out of office. And but they couldn't actually support Donald Trump, otherwise the whole world would explode. The world would go crazy, literally. I mean, if they openly supported Donald Trump, they would find themselves unable to win elections that way. So, well, not support him, but support his style of rhetoric. So, and that's where they find themselves now. they have to walk this sort of tightrope to not be primaried by the fired up rural MAGA base, but they also can't openly support his style of rhetoric. Otherwise, they're going to lose to the Democrats. So that's, I think, the state the Republican Party is in now, and they need to change. Otherwise, they're going to continue to do this, and this rural base is going to wither away. Like you saw Georgia and Arizona turn red. Turn blue, I'm sorry. In what world is that normal? It isn't. Because as they're just appealing to their rural base, what happens is everyone else flips away. The patrician Republican rich Northeasterners, they all voted for Joe Biden because Donald Trump was crazy. They need to change. Otherwise, they're not going to lose a single election. They're not going to win a single election, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there are a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump on the basis that he was the only person who they'd seen possibly in their lifetime who actually got them. You know, he was talking about because we're in a world now where globalization, automation are really taking away jobs very fast, especially in countries like the United States. And Donald Trump came along and he was talking about building a big wall to keep the immigrants out. And people see immigrants taking their jobs in a way they don't see, robots taking their jobs. And immigrants are more easy to keep out of a country than robots as well, aren't they? Because they can't be built by a company. And so Donald Trump's divisive rhetoric really appealed to a lot of people, but as Luke said, it didn't appeal to enough people because it scared away so many people. Its divisiveness and sort of, the way it was so provocative, and in the end, obviously it ended up with him getting people so into such a spiral of hatred that they ended up storming the Capitol building. And so I agree with Luke. He's scared away lots of the Republican base. So I think that in the future we're going to be seeing a return possibly to people more like Mitt Romney and a more moderate base, on the basis that the Democrats are increasingly going further left. So there is a place at the center right which can be taken by the Republican Party, and that will get them a lot of support with the important voters that they need, because it's not just the sort of, the rural sort of, hard sort of laborers that they need votes from, because that's not enough people. And once they move to the center right, they'll also have a better chance at appealing to immigrants and people who have more sympathies with other people in a way that Donald Trump's supporters haven't done.
I wouldn't be so optimistic about that, Archie, because even though there is that the richer, more traditionalist Republican base, that the MAGA base holds a huge swath of the Republican base. And so if Republicans like Romney, like Collins, like Murkowski, like Sass, if they try and take hold of the party, people are just going to primary the hell out of them. Because, I mean, the base is deeply split. And only by that alliance of the rich people, the rich patrician Northeasterners, and like the Koch brothers, for example, and the MAGA base, the rural heartland base, is the Republican Party able to keep power? So I'm not sure if the Republicans are going to be able to move away from that.
Yeah, I do see what you're saying, and I suppose that also a lot of it depends on what Joe Biden's going to do, because if he, depending on just things like those $2,000 a week, the checks that they're, which are bigger than the $600 that the Republicans are giving people. And just things like that, it depends a lot actually on what lots of people feel in their lives, because people feeling stuff. That's one of the reasons Ronald Reagan became so successful, is that people really felt that they were richer because of his tax cuts. and people really felt that the economy was doing well, and people really felt that the country was doing well because of the way his hopeful rhetoric combined with his economic policy really made things go up. And that, you know, they had a lot of the impact from that in the end was negative, but certainly to people in a short-term basis, that was an overwhelmingly positive thing. And I would just quickly also, so I think it depends on what Joe Biden does a lot as well, because also just in terms of what he does in terms of the political spectrum, the further left he goes, the closer to the center the Republicans can appeal to, and that's going to be very important in determining who takes their base. And because, you know, the MAGA people, as powerful as they are, I think, you know, so many people hate them. I also don't think they can win back the presidency ever again.
So I think that's an interesting comment, that Joe Biden will affect what the Republicans do. I wouldn't be so optimistic, to be honest. In the last Democratic administration, the Republicans won a lot and got a lot by simply criticizing and not signing on to any single thing that Obama did. I mean, from the month that Obama started, he passed the stimulus package with only 3 or 4 Republican votes. So, I mean, it's not as if that's going to change in the next Democratic administration. I'm thinking the Biden administration start is very similar to that of the Obama administration. Think about it. They both are in a time of crisis. They both are in a divisive time with a previously somewhat divisive president. I'm not sure how divisive George W. Bush was. And they both had to do a stimulus package in the first few months of their administration if they want to keep the economy and the U.S. going. Now, what similarities do we see between that? Already, Leader McConnell and Leader Schumer can't get to an agreement about a stimulus package, can't get to agreement about how the Senate will function, let alone a stimulus package. So, I mean, McConnell on day one, literally, he had a half a day of partisanship going, we appreciate Vice President Kamala Harris. And then, like, after that, half a day after Biden was inaugurated, you've got partisanship again. And the Republicans can get a lot from just saying no, 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 no to what the Democrats do. I mean, so I'm not sure whether we're just going to revert back to the days of 2008 and 2012 when the Republicans can forget about Trump and just be partisan Republicans. And I'm not sure. They need a thought leader in their party. 2024 is going to be an integral date for their party. I'm not sure how integral the midterms are going to be, because if the Republicans continue as they've been for the last few days, then I think the Democrats might sweep the midterms. They've swept Georgia. They've swept Arizona, 2 states you'd never think would be blue. I mean, who knows what's going to happen for the Democrats in the midterms and the Republicans continue as they are. But in 2024, they need a thought leader because they can't continue as they are. The only thing that they're holding on to power with now is institutions that give them power. Gerrymandering is a powerful thing. I mean, look at some of the districts that Republican representatives have. It's not voters choosing the politicians, it's politicians choosing the voters, right? They're winding around so they can keep districts of very rural voters. And Republicans are better than Democrats at gerrymandering. Then you've got the Senate, which gives a majority to smaller states, and you've got the Electoral College. So the Republican Party, with this scorched earth tactic, is only staying relevant and only be able to stay that right wing because of these institutions. So as demographics change, though, even these institutions won't allow them to power. So they may be able to continue saying no, 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 no for till 2020 to 2024. But in 2024, they need a center-right thought leader. Otherwise, they're just going to diminish and vanish away.
Yeah, I agree with Luke. I mean, in the midterms, you know, we're seeing a difference. If you just look at the difference between representatives in Congress, like Lauren Boebert, who's an awful human being, and some of the more reasonable Democrats, people like Liz Cheney, who voted to impeach Trump, who is a sorry, Republicans, not Democrats, who is and Marjorie Taylor Greene as well, who's also a terrible representative. And there's a whole and a decent proportion of the Republican freshman caucus are really hardcore MAGA, really extreme people who are sort of campaigning just by taking a selfie with a gun and then being elected. And that's very different to the way that lots of other representatives are campaigning. And I agree with Luke. And you can't win a presidency off such a divided base, because one man can't appeal to those two polarized, even within one party, bases who are so polarized to one another. But I would like to pick up on a point that Luke made, and about how they managed to do quite well out of opposing Obama. But I think that one of the reasons they were able to oppose Obama so easily is things like Obamacare, and basically you only feel the impact of that once something bad happens to you. And the overwhelming proportion of Americans haven't had something bad enough happen to them that they're really feeling the effects of Obamacare. And that means that all that they're seeing is Mitch McConnell telling them, look how much the deficit's gone up, look how much spending's gone up, look at your taxes going up, and look, that's being spent on doing socialism for random other people. So Biden actually does have an opportunity to pass policies that, should they affect everyone, really will force the Republican Party, I think, to come in more to the center. But I do agree with Luke, that is a very optimistic approach, and it's rather unlikely to happen. I think that, but at the same time, it's just, especially with people able, so long as people can remember the insurrection. And depending on what happens over the next few days, as the FBI investigates that, if it comes to light that Congress representatives were in favor of it, whatever, because there are pieces of, there are people saying that people were giving tours and things like that. So I think it depends on the extent to which MAGA politicians, rather than the base, was involved with some of the worst things that have happened, as well as what happens with Russia investigations that are still ongoing. But I think that they're going to be facing a really tough decision over the next few years, because they're going to have to drop some voters, because Donald Trump came and he radicalized a lot of people, but not everyone. And the people who he didn't radicalize have gone in the opposite direction because they hated him so much. So they're going to be facing a really tough decision about which path they're going to pursue and how they're going to try and reunite their caucus, especially if the Democrats start looking at trying to make DC and Puerto Rico, trying to give them statehood, which is a campaign that may well pick up some momentum.
But I mean, as you say, they're going to lose voters. If they move to the center right, they're going to pick up voters, right? They can pick up some Latinos, pick up some of the Black vote. And I mean, they've already got quite a bit of the Latino vote, Cuban Americans, especially in Florida. But one of the other very important things is, think about the other major center-right parties in the West. So the Conservative Party in the UK, the Conservative Party in Canada, the CDU in Germany, are any of them as right-wing as the Republican Party? I mean, think about it. You got, most of them are anti-gun. Most of them believe in climate change or pro-climate regulations. The majority of them don't care about abortion or gay marriage. Yet those are all still major issues in the Republican Party. And like I said, the way they're able to do that is because of institutions. And I forgot to mention the filibuster. The filibuster might be the most important of those institutions, because it encourages Mitch McConnell's no saying, because it allows them to just, with 40 or more votes, stop a Democratic agenda. So I've got a small feeling that the filibuster is going to be used quite a lot in the next 4 years, because you got a Democratic majority of 51 with Kamala Harris, and then the Republican Party, literally with only 40 votes, can just go no, 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 right? So you're going to need 11. You're going to need 11 not hard right Republicans. And right now, who have you got? You've got Collins, you've got Murkowski, you've got Sass, you've got Romney. That's 4. I mean, the rest of the Republicans aren't going to work with the Democrats. So, but back to the question of the voters and the base. I mean, you're right that it depends on whether Joe Biden goes left or not, and they got to go more center right to fill in that gap. And if they can pick up more voters who are from not traditionally Republican backgrounds, that would be great. And they could, but first of all, they need to do that with a thought leader in 2024. I keep on saying that, and I don't know who that's gonna be. Honestly, Romney is not gonna run again. Murkowski and Sass don't have much name recognition. I mean, who is the next Ronald Reagan of the Republican Party? Because, as God is my witness, they're in dire need of one, right? I mean, I'm scraping my mind, and I can't find any notable Republican senator or governor who is going to be important to the Republicans in 2024. All we can think of now are Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley. And by God, they're not the sort of people who are going to be the thought leaders of the next Republican Party. They're going to continue the Trump legacy, and that's not good for the voters or the Republican Party. They may win the primaries. If you like, the strategy for winning the primaries now, because so many rural voters are, is just be as defensive of Trump as possible. So it's always like, how right can you go in the primaries? But then you're gonna, if someone like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley wins the primaries, which there is a big likelihood that they will, then if they want to have any national relevance, they've got to do a huge about face and go way, 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 way back to the center to pick up these voters who are the types of voters who flipped Georgia and the types of voters who flipped Arizona. And people say that Georgia and Arizona and states like those flipped because of rich Republicans who don't like Trump. That may be the case, but I doubt it. I think the bigger reason is shifting demographics. I mean, Stacey Abrams' efforts in Georgia were integral to the election of Warnock and Ossoff. And similarly in Arizona, that's a state that I know quite well. I mean, it's becoming more and more, there are more and more immigrants there, more especially Latinos, by the minute. So that is helping the Democrats. So it's not as if the Republicans can re-pick up the space in Arizona and Georgia simply by appealing to these rich Republicans. They've got to go back to the center. And with Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, I'm not sure, even with the best partisan maneuvering, they're going to be able to do this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there are so I doubt that Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley could even win the primaries, to be honest. So many people hate them now. Josh Hawley, with that picture of him raising a fist, to sort of salute the insurrectionists at the Capitol. Both of them opposed the election results. I think there are just too many Republicans that are really anti-Ted Cruz and anti-Josh Hawley. And you look at the, for example, the Lincoln Project, which is a very influential Republican organization, which dedicated itself to removing Donald Trump from office because it thought that it decided that he was not a Republican. Abraham Lincoln was the founder of the Republican Party, was a co-founder of the Republican Party. And I think it's fair to say that many will agree that Donald Trump went against the values of the Republican Party has held close to it for a very long time. And so I think that Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley are certainly not going to be the future of the Republican Party, because even if they somehow manage to win the primary, all they're going to do for the party is get wiped out, because too many people can still remember the damage Donald Trump has caused. People know that he really didn't achieve very much. His tax cuts didn't do anything really for many people, for ordinary people, and his and his the achievements of his administration, the things that we can argue were the greatest achievements of Donald Trump, were mainly in Middle Eastern foreign policy. And that's not something people feel in their day-to-day lives. So I think that, and actually, in terms of the future of the Republican Party, Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz are going to get them wiped out in the way that Ronald Reagan wiped out Jimmy Carter, because too many people can remember it. Too many, especially if Joe Biden is a successful president. Then a rise to nomination of Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley is just not, it's not going to help them at all. So I think there are a lot of variables, and certainly Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley is going to be a very negative. If they were to rise up the ranks of the party, it would be a very negative impact.
All right. So it's interesting you say that. I agree with you completely. Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz cannot win an election. They can win a primary, definitely, because you say so many people hate them, and the people who hate them, maybe there are a few people in the Republican base, but really, it's mostly Democrats and former Republicans who are now independents who hate them. But I mean, think about the two past energizing thought leaders in the party. And I'm not saying this in any positive light, but there is one thing in common between Donald Trump and Ronald Reagan. They both energized the base, drove up turnout, and energized the party. And one did it for good, and one did it for bad. I can let you figure out who those were. But, I mean, and one thing that was in common between both of them was they crossed the line between celebrity and politics. The difference between Trump and Reagan was governor of California before he became president. Probably a wise step not to go president immediately. And especially the position of governor is a good one, because I mean that's the most similar to the presidency because it's an executive position. But I'm not sure you're going to get anywhere with the traditional politicians nowadays if you want to run the party. But I think one person who I think ticks all of these boxes, who I really like, maybe she was a little bit too much of a Trump supporter, but I quite like the prospects of Nikki Haley running, because I'm not but maybe the Trump legacy has scarred her too much, but she was governor of South Carolina. She was a representative to the United Nations, ambassador to the United Nations. She wasn't a celebrity, but I mean, she has good prospects for 2024, I think, but I really don't know. Maybe Tim Scott, from South Carolina, who he is a good senator, and he wasn't too keen on the Trump rhetoric stuff. But I'm really not sure who can be an energizing leader for the party nowadays.
Yeah, well, and I think they've also got to be careful in that you talked about how both Donald Trump and Ronald Reagan energized the base, but actually Donald Trump also energized the Democratic base with that giant turnout they managed to get off the back of his rhetoric. Really, there was nothing that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris could say that would achieve the kind of turnout that they managed to get without an opponent as annoyingly irritating, sort of rubbish, if you like, as Donald Trump, someone who so many people would look at and think, I can't believe you're the head of state of my country. And Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley will be the same. So I think that it's actually that they're going to have to be careful, not just in achieving, in nominating, not achieving somebody who has ideas and seems new and seems energizing, but also someone who deflates the sort of the current Democratic base, which you're seeing giant turnout from them, and in Georgia it was the same. So I think that they're going to have to be very careful about not energizing the Democratic base as well.
Yeah, I agree. One prospect that we haven't talked about, but is actually quite a very real prospect, is the thought of the Republican Party splitting, even. Think about what we've been talking about, how split the Republican base is. There are two distinct factions of the Republican base. There is the MAGA faction and the traditional faction, and both of them hold a large amount of sway on the party. But I don't think the party can go any longer holding on to both. So either the party, in a unified effort, moves more to the left, or there is the very, very, very real possibility that they could split. Because you've got, like you said, some of the freshman congressmen, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, are just crazy from a Republican point of view. They're even like Kevin McCarthy is denouncing them. I mean, well, he denounced their efforts to impeach Biden, but I mean, but also there's some more like 10 traditional Republicans in the base, or in their freshman House caucus. Think about the 10 Republicans who voted to impeach Trump. A great deal of them are freshmen. So those two groups are ever more so sort of tearing at each other. So, like I said, unless they don't get an energizing leader in 2024, there is the possibility that they could split because of there's no unity in the party anymore. There's just no more unity. And that is a dangerous thought, because that itself means the Republican Party splits. It's unlikely that they're going to be able to keep power because they've split the base. The base was more unified before Trump, but now they've split the base. And if the Republican Party splits, the Democrats will be able to take power. It's as simple as that, because they've got a plurality of the base. So that is a very real possibility, and a scary possibility at that, because the Democrats, even with safeguards of the institutions like the Senate, the filibuster, the Electoral College, they are still going to be able to run riot over the country.
Yeah, Luke, I agree. There is a danger. There's a very real danger that the Republican Party could split. Mitch McConnell is not capable of the kind of unifying leadership that the party requires. His politics is all about saying no to Democrats, not yes to anything he proposes. He doesn't really have an agenda that isn't, let's say no to Joe Biden or Barack Obama or whoever's in power at the time. Let's say no to their agenda. So there is indeed a prospect of the party splitting. And then not only would that be, very bad for that base, of course, because the Democratic Party would just take everything, but it would also be interesting to see, it's a two-party state. Obviously, it's always been that way. So I think it will also be interesting to see which side would prevail out of the MAGA and the more traditional Republican base. Because what we know, if the party were to split, there would be it would really, the future of the country for a very long time would depend on which of the two parties that would then develop out of that would prevail in the long run.
Thank you very much, Archie and Luke. That was a great discussion. Very good, very invigorating. So if you enjoyed that, please look at our website, please follow our Twitter, and thank you very much for watching.